Catherine Chalmers, I'm so thrilled to have you here for discussion about your art and the intersection of insects and art. I wanted to start with a quote from your website where you say, "I never work alone. My colleagues just don't happen to be human." Now that's intriguing. So I'd love for you to tell me/us about your colleagues.
Well, I prefer ones with 6 legs to 2. Although I've had colleagues that have no legs before. So, it just anything from 6 to 2, but I've also worked with tarantulas. So let's expand it to 8. But yeah, I'm interested in that place where our worlds come together. And so as an artist, I use the tools of art to try to make a connection and do investigations and somehow see where there's similarities or where there's complete, I don't know, hatred or chaos or complexities, anywhere where that border where the two come together is sort of a nexus of interest.
And you have to be really selective, right? There are 1.1 million described species of insects with many more undescribed. And among those that you've focused on and collaborated with, you've got the most obvious being a cockroach, an American cockroach. And this is a generally solitary, hemimetabolous, cosmopolitan insect versus leafcutter ants, which are eusocial, more social than humans, tropical, or the species you looked at, and fully metamorphosing. So they go through a pupal stage. So when I think about insects, those two are about as far apart as they can be, at least in certain contexts. So
well, I think that science and particularly science departments, if you take that section of the university, separates these things out. I'm coming at it from an artist and I see things and I don't see other things. And the distinction that you are making doesn't really apply to my artistic interests or sensibilities. I sort of get a hunch that something may be interesting over there and explore it. So I think there's probably tons of things I will never in my lifetime even have the opportunity to see because let's say I'm not working in Sri Lanka or, I come across things, I have opportunities, I see things, I respond, I make some investigations, try things out. And so it's somewhat random according to the fact that I'm an American, I live in New York City, sort of. And so that dictates sort of how the input comes to me. It never comes through any of the categorizations.
And some of them you had to go well out of your way, namely Serena Peninsula, Costa Rica, to film and focus for a decade on leafcutter ants. How did that opportunity arise? And when you were planning on it, did you have specific ideas in mind?
I went on a sort of vacation with a scientist and a filmmaker for the Discovery Channel on a trek through Corcovado National Forest on the OSA. And that's the first time I had seen leafcutter ants. And I couldn't believe they existed. They were so beautiful. They were amazing. They were carrying these things. We think of humans as carrying the things that are important to them. There aren't that many animals that have the ability to carry something that has meaning to them. I mean, like a leopard can drag something up a tree and eat it, whatever. But it doesn't. Essentially, its job isn't to be carrying these things. And so you had this dark forest floor and these bright green leaves, going across, and you look down and there's little insects, carrying them. And, if there are flowers, they'd be carrying the flowers. And I just was so amazed by them. And I was working on the cockroach project at the time, and I had tons of stuff still to do. This was I think I saw them in 2000. So this is a long time, 7 years until that first trip. Actually, the first trip was to Panama. And I sort of had a file and I would throw ideas into it. How would I work with them? What is there? Why did they intrigue me? How can I work with something that is so overwhelmingly nature? Because the cockroach project, the American cockroach has already moved into our walls. They already have a reputation in our world. They already play certain roles for us. And so it already, in a sense, had a predestined cultural relationship to us, as well as being natural. And then the more I investigated, the more interesting they became. But the ants were so overwhelmingly nature's that how does it really cross over into our world? And why do I care? What's in there? So that took kind of 7 years. And I also just thinking about the logistics. How am I going to work with millions of ants somewhere in a rainforest? And like, how, I had only done work in the studio. I had never taken a video camera or a film camera out into the wild to do something. I mean, obviously I'd take, random vacation photographs, and so I just, the idea of how to work with them then became a whole different thing that I had not to that degree grappled with. So, and then 7 years in, I had an invitation from a man who owns an island in Panama, who's an art collector, saw one of my pieces, has a research station for scientists. And he goes, I'm sick of having scientists down. They always tell me everything, And he said, I want to have artists down there. They're more interesting. So he said, do you want to come to the island? And I'm like, do you have leaf cutter ants? And he goes, oh, yes, they're everywhere. And I go, okay, I'm coming. So in a very short period of time, I, bought a video camera and, lights and batteries, because, on the dark forest floor, everything has to be illuminated. You have to protect yourself from the sun and the changing light. So the idea of going on an expedition like that just entailed an entirely different way of thinking about equipment too.
I'd love to spend time talking about your methods from studio to field. How about we jump all the way to all the trials, tribulations? I mean, as a scientist doing field work, it's just a given that things are going to fail. And you enter the scene knowing that weather will be in your way, your projects will be either eaten or bumped over, or something will go wrong. And each field biologist will have many stories about how science can spiral, and every once in a while, eventually, miraculously, seemingly, you can get that much closer to understanding natural phenomena from an empirical standpoint. Now, you enter the scene, and of course, you're going to face many of the same constraints and the same challenges. And you're no longer in your studio space where you can control so many variables. And you certainly can't control the millions of collaborators or colleagues, right? So
I'd never worked with a social species before. I'd only worked with an individual. And that is an entirely different thing.
It's funny, when I was in front of my master's committee for entomology, I had this idea. I wanted to study sleep and paper wasps. And one person, Reg Chapman, turned to me and he said, there's so many factors you can't control for. Why not go with a solitary organism like a grasshopper? And he studied grasshoppers. And I just honestly had two responses. I really love Hymenoptera. I really love bees and wasps and ants. And eventually, I'd like to ask questions of a social bent, of a social nature. So yeah, the difficulties are inherent.
Yeah.
And the complications are magnified depending on what questions you want to address. And I imagine the same is the case artistically. So here you are in the field, and the range of products, and anybody can look at your website and see the beautiful products that you've come up with. And they range from, at least to the novice eye, there's a camera on the scene, it wasn't very invasive, you attained gorgeous footage, to, hey, there are manipulations. Whoa, they're spelling out words. To, they're delivering treasures to the chosen one, a statue, a golden statue of an adequate, so, and then there's a stark white background with war. So how did those projects vary in terms of levels of invasiveness and ability to pull them off?
Well, when I went to Panama, I was there for 3 weeks and somehow got enough footage to put together We Rule. And I had my first idea about working with them is that they would carry something that was meaningful in my mind to both worlds. Social insects only are social because they have a communication between them. The communication, whether it's pheromones, chemical, touch, sound, whatever it is, a social species stays together as a colony through communication.
Yeah.
And it's very much how we are also social. We communicate with one another. And that ultimately is one of the main glues that holds us together, that I can communicate with you and I can communicate with somebody else, and we can have group communications. And the ants have individual communications, they have group communications. So communication was the thing that stood out right from the beginning. And I thought, this is what they're going to carry. They're going to be carrying something that has to do with communication. So then I'm thinking about, well, their leaves, I can take an X-Acto knife and maybe I can cut letters out of them and maybe I'll have them say something.
Yeah.
So, and say something about them to us is sort of what my idea was. But I didn't really necessarily have, I kind of come to that idea and it was vague. It was sitting there. And then in a very short period of time, I ended up going down there. And that was a lot of luck. I mean, that was sheer luck. And that was, even though I had seen them and then I kind of had planned sort of what I wanted to do, I didn't have any ability to do it. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any ability to go down there. I didn't know where it would go. I didn't, how does this all work? And it kind of needs to be supported. You need electricity. Somebody needs to feed you in the middle of the rainforest. You're not feeding yourself. There needs to be support. So I did it. I pulled it off. I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. And then I thought, well, what else is there? I didn't know what else was there. But I took the next year off and went back to the Cockroach Project because I had 2 big shows and I was doing 2 sculptures for it. And then 2 years later, in 2009, is when I met the guy in Costa Rica who has 5,000 acres on the Oso. And the nice thing is, it's right outside of the park, and the incidence of leafcutter ants is greater in disturbed habitat than it is in primary rainforest. And so that turned out to be really, I could have gone back to Panama and to the island. It was primary rainforest, and there weren't enough colonies to choose from. I had 1 big colony that I worked with. There was another big colony at the time that I really couldn't reach. And so I was dependent upon 1 colony. And really, this project, and when you talk about all the things that could go wrong doing field work, this project had to have layer after layer after layer after layer of good luck to have come out what it was. Because the project only really grew when I met him, went down to Costa Rica and saw that his property at this point, this part of it where I was, between 2 rivers, the mountains and the ocean, was a queendom of ants. And it was a queendom of ants because of the configuration of ground cover and these old mango trees, and leafcutter ants love the leaves of fruit trees. So it supported more large colonies and more medium-sized colonies than any I had ever been. And then everything started to become alive because you see the dynamics between the colonies. You have more options. Colonies have different behaviors. Some of them are very flexible. Some of them are really, really stubborn. Some of them are warlike. Some of them are not. And so that allowed the project then to grow. So I went down there with a second idea, this idea that what happens when the ants go down into their underground colony? I mean, that it's so special what they do. It's a parade, it's a pageant. And I had my idea going down there was, because I'd done a reconnaissance trip, saw that it was incredible, and then made a commitment to go down there for 6 weeks in the dry season. And my idea was that to make their ordinary green parade into something that was special. And so from then on in, like, how do you make a gold ant? I mean, how does all this stuff happen? I probably met the one person in New York who would do it for me at a price so I could probably have it done. And it's just like, and it was before the price of gold skyrocketed, and because it's 18 karat gold. I mean,
it was actually gold?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, because, I'm with a close-up camera. If it's, and he said, I'm working with gold, I'm not doing it at all. He said, all the other metals are really cruddy.
It's not a hollow cast. It looks like it was.
Oh yeah, it was. I got a Guggenheim, so that helped.
Wow.
So really, the luck of meeting my friend who has this property in Costa Rica opened the entire door for the project, and then the luck of what the weather was when I was there, and what the ants happened to be taking and what they wouldn't take. And so all of that factored in, and then the randomness of being able to find a war. So, you don't really find leafcutter ant wars in the rainforest because two large colonies are not really allowing each other to grow up. Let's say you have a big colony. If another colony is rising up from small to medium, they'll probably wipe it out before it gets sizable. So you never, you might see little skirmishes here and there, but you're not going to see kind of the massive wars that I saw. And they're also in the primary rainforest really difficult to find because they're lost. The battles are in the leaf litter. You can't really see them. So it has to be, I identified one colony that had started a lot of wars when I was there. And that was the one that I was heavily surveying. It's all of its neighbors to see if it was picking off one. And usually they do it at night. So then I'd be there at night and I'd be searching around and seeing, because they get agitated and you can tell in their movement that they're not going out and foraging, they're going out to kill. And so, having gone to one place over and over again, I had the advantage of getting to know the personalities of these colonies and keeping an eye on ones, let's say, that tended to come out during the day, which is easier for me to work with them. And then also this one that was very warlike.
What I love is that through your work, you're learning about individual differences as well as colony level differences. A hot topic in animal behavior involves what's called behavioral syndromes or personalities. And it has extended from individuals to colonies at times. One PhD dissertation looked at honeybee colony level aggression. So for you to see and document very carefully one colony versus another, this is the one that's going to behave the way that works for this particular project is really exciting to me. Because it means...
being able to go back to the same location over and over and over again was also a key to the whole project. Because then I started keeping detailed notes of what they were doing because it was so fascinating. It was sort of like the Game of Thrones. And I just, and I would go for 6 weeks in the dry season in the winter and then have, all year to edit, to figure out what I've done, what I haven't done. Is it working? Is it not working? And then go back and then see those colonies again, or the colonies that all of a sudden are not there. So what happened? Did they get picked off? Did they move? Did they die? And there was interesting. There was one colony that was huge that when I first went the first trip in 2009, the next year it was gone. And then the year after that, another colony had moved in because that colony then was sort of small to medium.
Huh.
So, I saw what happens to these, to these colonies. And like with the war, I didn't know who won because I went back the next year and both colonies were gone. And And
I just imagine this happens for those studying wild colonies for science as well, unless you monitor perpetually, you just don't know. Like, for example, there's documentation that large leafcutter ant colonies will get up and go. And the thinking is maybe that's parasite load is too high in the old nest and it pays. But, this is high risk.
Yes, and I think in the case of the first in 2010, when I came back and that large colony was gone, I think the reason why it left is it was being hammered by the colony that was nearby them that was so warlike, because that is the, let's see, that's the war that I photographed. It's the big colony. No, that was the first war I saw. And I was working on The Chosen and I didn't photograph. I think maybe I took a couple pictures and I kind of did a little video, kind of got a sense of what it was, but they were being hammered and they were being kind of hammered on a regular basis. And that was the first time that I had seen what they look like when they get agitated and they're going to war. And so I think the reason why it left is because its neighbor was so unpleasant.
Now, in the case of war, just as in food chain and sex before, during, after, and other pieces, you've chosen stark white backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
And you've talked a little bit about why you've chosen a stark white background in the past, and I'd love to revisit that conversation or that idea, because there are a lot of reasons to do it. The dark forest floor of a tropical rainforest, even during the day, you can highlight the behaviors when it's on white, but also you can focus a viewer's attention on the drama. But what you suggested, and I don't want to put your words in your mouth, but what you suggested is that it actually helps remove the distancing variable of nature, of the wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's with different projects, I suppose, the food chain project being primarily, is that I wanted it to put it in a neutral environment where it wasn't nature and it wasn't human. I mean, obviously white, tends to be associated with humans, but also, white's associated with galleries and with art. And I just felt that it was a way to isolate what was going on and not have a context that identified it one way or another. Because wherever you put it, it's going to create a context. And so I thought that was actually the most neutral of spaces that I can imagine. With the war, it was really actually very practical because the battles spread out. They're no longer on these really beautiful, cleaned pathways. The war just disseminates over, maybe 10 yards by 10 yards and really kind of scatters out. So when I saw that this war was happening, the one that I filmed, during the day when the aggressive colony wasn't out, I raked the whole area. And so that, because here you have brown leaf litter and brown ants and brown dirt. And also I wanted to, particularly in the war, dissociate that it was just an insect war and make it more general, abstracted in a sense, and make it a generalized conflict. And the white would do that. But I also really couldn't film them well if they weren't separated, because if you notice all the three other films, they really are never on dirt. I'm always running them up. I'll run them over roots. I'll run them over rocks, and I can ant wrangle and I can get them to, deviate, and I can run them up on a set and down the other side. So even when it looks like they are on ground, it's usually they're up on a set. And I also was collecting different colored dirt. So I would go and collect this golden kind of dirt and put it down so that you would see a distinction between the reddish brown ant and then the dirt, which was actually a different color than the ordinary dirt. There was places where you would see that really beautiful, kind of clayish sort of infused. And so I'm always running them up over something. And in the war, of course, it's just a war. I'm not moving them. They are fighting. There is no moving in war. There's no manipulating in war. It just happens. So I took my white seamless and cut it up and scattered it in pieces all over this area because they were only fighting at night. The aggressor came out at 6. Like you could set your watch and he'd come out at 6. And then it was attacking this medium-sized colony that was actually trying to send this line back home at that point. So this colony was going up in a territory that was really close to the aggressor, but they were doing it during the day and trying to essentially, from what I could tell, get back before 6, before this other colony came out. So sometimes the skirmishes were small, or sometimes, a lot of ants were left up there and they were getting back and then they were being hammered. So I never knew exactly where the war was. And this allowed me to then film whatever parts of the war ended up on a piece of white.
Oh. And
so it became practical for just to see the war, but then I liked conceptually that it abstracted it from, these are just, insects fighting.
And these are 2 massive colonies of Atta fungus-growing leafcutter ants in Costa Rica, going head to head, not one night, but night after night after night.
Night after night after night after night. They'd fight for usually about 2 hours until there was a large colony and the medium colony was trying to get home. The colonies set out lines all over the place. This was only one line of the colony. And the colony lived actually quite a ways away. And so really, they were fighting every single night. So, I was filming the colony that was being attacked. I was filming during the day, and I was filming the first part of Antworks. So at night, it was being hammered, which I was really happy to find a war to film. Mm-hmm. But of course, I'm kind of rooting for the colony that I'm filming during the day, that I have this elaborate set that it's running over. But it's great. I mean, like every night, and some nights were bigger, some nights were less. And I knew I needed a lot of footage to be able to cut things together, to have some options. And it fought for, I don't know how long it was fighting and before I found it. I don't know, was it fighting 2 weeks before that or a day before that? I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But then at one point the aggressor went the other way. War was over. And it was a huge colony. When it came out at night, it came out like in a solid, of ants. And they had the main one came out this way. They had another main one coming out that way, and another main one. Then they had some smaller exit and entrance holes. But those were really the 2 that I had seen them use. But they were all coming out in this. They're all coming out this way. And then one night I went to film and they were entirely going that way.
Wow. So it was basically territorial conflict.
I don't know. They never took over the territory of the colonies that they slaughtered. So it wasn't necessarily a territory. I mean, because I would watch them and I would see where they would go. Okay, so they just slaughtered the neighbor over on the, just be on the east. And I mean, just like completely slaughtered them. There was nothing alive left. And they never went over there. I mean, it was a really rich area, and they never went over there. They never took advantage of it.
Fascinating. Now, you use the word wrangling and wrangle. I want to know to what extent, I mean, you laid down white plastic sheeting for
that was just for the war.
Yeah. But when it comes to like hardcore wrangling, and I'm imagining that's for Chosen and We Rule.
All of them.
Okay.
Less for We Rule.
Okay.
My wrangling techniques got better and better and better. And by the time, I mean, if you think about the order that I shot the films, there's no way I would have been able to shoot Antworks at the beginning. It was just way too sophisticated in all the ant wrangling techniques that needed to happen to do that film on every single stage. Where We Rule was pretty much just kind of a straightforward, March, and they were picking up things that I cut, from their leaves. But there wasn't much else in a sense going on where the ant works, where they're hanging artwork and parading one by one. Try to get an ant to do something for itself.
I wanted to ask you about that. Did you have to grab the WERULE and keep placing it, hoping that they would travel in the
Yeah, so
order?
what I did is I cut those letters and I left them in a pile.
Yeah.
And this is like a classic ant wrangling technique. So they're on the ground. I needed to get them up. I mean, I usually dig a hole for myself, but I needed to get them up where I could have a kind of an out of focus forest background, because I'm cutting, right? I'm going to be cutting individual letters or groups of letters, whatever, and putting them together.
Yeah.
And so I need to have some consistency behind me. So I got them up. And, I'll do that. So like I had a log. So I will take the log. I mean, this is like the easiest of the ant wrangling techniques. Yeah. I put the log in their pathway when the ants aren't there. Mm-hmm. And then I leaf litter heavily on both sides.
Ah, great.
So they are on their pathway, and then they hit this log, which is no problem for them to get up on, obviously, because they climb trees, but there's no pheromones on it. So it's as if somebody's turned the lights out and they just stop and they don't know what to do. And you see them all confused, and, they can smell underneath it that there are pheromones, but there's none where they're going to be walking. But if you heavily leaf litter on the sides, which is like the Himalayas to them, they don't want to do that. They would rather go on something like this log that's clean, that is, which is really easy to walk on. They would much rather walk on something like that and this is why they have maintained trails, is that, I mean, you think about the size of the ants and the size of the leaf litter, it's tough. So I leave them no other option but to go on this log.
But the most photogenic substrate.
And then I get the log scented. That's step one. You got to get the log scented. And then the next day, when they aren't there, I will raise the log up and leaf litter underneath it. Then they will come right up on the log and can continue going. So that would be like a two-step process. Yeah. In the bigger sets, I would have them scent the ramps going up to my set. Have them scent that in the same manner. I put leaf litter around, force them to go across it. Once they get the pheromones on it, they're happy as can be. They go back and forth. It's no big deal. So I get the ramp going up and the ramp going down, and then the set on the top where I'm doing, like where the cave is and stuff like that, where I can light it. Then they go up the ramp and then they hit the set, and then they're lost. And on a 4-foot board, let's say, it takes them a couple hours to really get comfortable with it. But I would heavily leaf litter the path below. And I would also had a dilute vinegar mister that I put on the leaves, and they hated it. So, because otherwise, they really, I would get them up the ramp, but then of course the scent is still on the ground. So they, then they're trying to get back. So it's just easier to kind of cover up on, I put leaf litter and then scent the leaf litter.
So how much, and this is just, say a couple of case scenarios that you're laying out for us. How much of this was it trial and error, you solo working out the problems? And how much of it did you at least get some advice from entomologists or field researchers or people who are used to ants, or say cockroaches or flies? Or
in the case of the ants, I won't name names, but it's a very prominent entomologist, an ant specialist, E.O. Wilson, PhD, the whole 9 yards. And I said, I'm going down to Costa Rica in 2 months or 6 weeks. I don't know. I've read research about ants, but really ultimately, I don't know what I'm going to find. And I said, do they go up the tree, let's say, and pile leaves at the bottom, and then some of them go back and forth like this? like, how am I going to cut these letters? Will my scent matter to them? All these sort of questions about what am I going to find down there? And, I'm asking like question after question. He goes, oh, I don't know. Just find a big colony. You'll be fine.
What?
That was it.
I can tell you 9 out of 10 myrmecologists would have had a heyday with this and offered all kinds of advice and interesting stories. You chose that one oddball myrmecologist.
And this is one who has written a lot of books for lay people.
Oh.
I know.
Okay. So you're on your own essentially?
Yeah. So I thought, well, and when I went to Panama, there was two funny things. So this, Italian collector with his private island and 30 miles of coast and, building this 65,000 square foot compound on the top of this island. It was a huge island, it had howler monkeys. Smithsonian had done a biodiversity study of the area for him. And so, he was the one who said, oh yeah, leafcutter ants are everywhere. He came over to the studio. I'm like, okay, great. So then I'm like investing all this money and all this equipment and trying to figure out how to do this. And really literally the week before I left, he said, oh, well, did you talk to the woman at the Smithsonian? He said, I'm down here. I don't see any leafcutter ants. And I'm thinking, and then randomly, one of my friends was friends with his ex-girlfriend, and we happened to go to dinner. And she said, oh, don't listen to him. He's not out in the forest anyways. So I just went down there, and then I thought, well, I'm going to find what I'm going to find. And if I find nothing, then I don't know, at least I've, gotten farther than I had before. But it turned out to be a great situation. It's just, he didn't have as many ants. Yeah, on the island.
Oh, I was going to say, thankfully, when you're in the tropics, you'll never find nothing.
Yes, exactly. And then the other thing is that, you hear about, leafcutter ants, they cut pieces of leaves and they carry leaves. And I'm like, great, I'm going to cut those leaves. It was a plan that should work. And I get down there and the ants aren't carrying leaves. And what do you mean they're not carrying leaves? Because it was in the dry season. And then sometimes they weren't carrying leaves. I'm walking, they were like picking up dried crap on the forest floor. And if you look at some of the stuff that they're carrying in We Rule, most of it's not leaves. And the leaves that they were carrying are mine. And they didn't come from the island because they weren't really carrying leaves. And I thought, you mean I'm working with leafcutter ants and they're not carrying leaves? So
that could have actually been an asset for you, right? What you placed, they moved or potentially preferred?
Well, so in the research, I read that they can be if you're a citrus farmer in Central America, they can strip your tree in a single night because they love the leaves of lemon, lime, orange, and stuff like that. Well, he owned 30 miles of coast and he had an organic farm to supply the people who came to the island. So, which is not open to the public. It's his own island. And so, I said, well, do you have any, citrus? I saw that he had citrus. Because, lemons and, so he said, well, talk to the farmer. So I took the boat and went and talked to the farmer. And he just, would like every 4 days when he would bring stuff to the island, would bring me a bunch of branches of a citrus tree.
Oh.
So it was a plant that the ants had never seen before because there's no citrus on the island.
Yeah.
So then I thought, okay, well, they should love this. It's better than what they have.
Yeah.
And so I took one of the branches. I'm with the colony. I think, oh, this is going to be great, and I put it in. And they was like, so I took a little branch of it and put it right in their pathway. They just kept going by it. I'm like, you don't like my offerings.
I'm offering you all this great stuff.
I know. And I'm bringing you all this. You don't understand. It's coming from the mainland. So I got really frustrated thinking this just isn't going to work. Yeah. So, I went back to the lab and then the next morning came back and it was stripped.
Oh.
And so I thought, okay, it's a rate issue.
Mm.
So how do you get them to like this faster? Because I can't wait 24 hours every time I want to work with them.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, if I cut up the leaves, because I knew that I mean, you know more about this than I do, but that, if one ant is passing an ant that said, there's a fire, that's not, and then it passes another one and says, there's a fire. If it does that in a short period of time, it will react. Obviously,
Mhm.
not a fire. You can have the same number of ants that say the same thing, but if it's over many, many minutes and distance,
Yeah.
then they won't react because it's a rate issue. They need to. So I thought if I cut up the leaves and put them right at the entrance where I couldn't film because it was on a slope,
Mhm.
then they would get the sense. And if one or two in a row would pass an ant coming this way, carrying that of my offerings, then by the time it got to where my set was, which was really probably a half an hour of a walk for them,
Oh,
or
wow.
20 minutes of a walk. Yeah, because it was really steep and then it plateaued out. So I was kind of in the plateau part. And then they would find me with my offering and they would be more likely to pick it up. So chumming them early turned out to be the key.
I love it. So here, this is an kind of off the wall question, but related to some extent. Your background is really varied. You did a BS in engineering.
Yeah.
And went into fine arts. And I'd love for you to go into a little bit of that history, because I'm curious if the engineering or other aspects of your varied history actually panned out as
Yes.
that's
Yes.
in the field or in your studio work.
Yes. Yes. It was design engineering.
Oh.
The program was focused on trying to train us to be inventors in a very
wow.
sense. Yeah, it was fabulous.
So you definitely invented ways of filming the difficult to film.
So the brainstorming and the production all was really informed by having an engineering background and breaking things into parts when things aren't working, addressing one kind of so that and also really kind of brainstorming with ideas. And if this doesn't work, then try that and flip it upside down and look at it the other way. And then, if you're having a hard time, let's say, making a decision, separate yourself out, so let's say when I'm filming, and then at the end of the day, I'm looking at the footage, I have to not be the director or the cinematographer then. I have to be the producer. And then I have to say, lighting person, that I'm sorry, the lighting isn't good enough. You need to redo the lighting. I could tell the set person, the set really needs to change according to this, because otherwise you don't make the decision because you know how much work it's going to take. And so I'm one person and when the artist, I'm the artist. And when I'm looking at the footage, I have to be the critic, but I can't be the critic and the artist at the same time. And that's kind of some of the things that I sort of learned in the engineering is if you are trying to invent these things and you're coming into problems, separate out your roles and pretend you have a role here and there. I mean, obviously in school, you're just one person too. So I would apply some of that.
Catherine, you were a superorganism working with superorganisms. You had a division of labor within yourself. I love it.
Yeah, because, it's hot and it's sticky and it's, so really making major changes, and then you have an exit ticket. So then you have to calculate how long will the changes take as opposed to moving on for the next scene. And there's always that, have I done enough with this scene before I strike the set and go on to the next scene?
And at what point, and was it very early, that you said, I want to be an artist? And at what point did you say, I want to be an insect artist?
Well, I went to the Royal College of Art in London, and the first year I was there, I was actually in the industrial design department. But I found a place in the college as a studio, because I almost had enough at Stanford for an art major, studio art major as well. It's a few art history classes short. Then I just took the engineering degree and didn't think about the art because I wasn't going to be an artist. I mean, I was just doing it because I liked it. And then I went to LA for 2 years and designed toys for Mattel.
Oh, really? What did you
Yeah.
design? What did you work on?
It was a series of small dolls that were sort of similar to Hello Kitty.
Oh my gosh, do you have those?
I don't actually. It came out after I left.
Uh,
So, and then I was taking drawing and painting at UCLA when I was down there. So then when I went to London, I applied to the industrial design department. And once I was that far away from home and everything that I knew, then I thought, forget all this real world stuff. I want to go and do my own thing. So I applied to the painting school, and because I'd already been there a year, I had a whole series of drawings and paintings that I had done in my own studio over there. So it was easier to have an interview because I had all my work there. So then I had an interview for the painting school because it's only a grad school. So, you don't change majors, you apply to such and such department. And miraculously, I got in. I'm sure I was the only person in there who didn't have an undergraduate degree in fine art. And then I spent 2 years there in the painting school. So really, it was that year when I was in industrial design, when I was painting and also doing design, where I said, I'll give myself a year of not knowing what I'm doing, flip back and forth, say I want to stay in the engineering design, or I want to be a fine artist, and living together, I'm gonna lock my ear off. I don't know, going back and forth, like because there's such different trajectories of life, and it entails everything, the financial part of it, because your main interests are not, particularly when you first get out of school, are not compensating you. So how do you deal with that? Whereas an engineer from Stanford, I would have been well compensated. So, there's like these two things you're weighing. I thought, okay, well, I'll flap back and forth for a whole year because it doesn't matter. And then at the end of the year, I will know. And then at the end of the year, I applied to the painting school. And then told my parents, and they were very unhappy.
You followed your passions, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And would you say you're one of the rarefied few who can survive as an artist in New York City following these passions exclusively, or do you complement?
No, I mean, there's a lot of artists who survive here, but you have however you do it. You do it one way or another.
Well,
when in New York, I sat behind the front desk of a contemporary art gallery. Hello, gallery. My friends in Stanford are like, "You're doing what? You're a receptionist as an art?" I mean, it's just like, I didn't know anybody here, so it allowed me to, meet people who had similar interests.
I'd like to read a quote from your book, American Cockroach.
Oh, wow.
And these are your words. Insects are a window into the unimaginable. Their biology and behaviors are routinely bizarre and enigmatic to us. They're refreshingly outside the human perspective. I think that our experience can be enhanced by an attempt to understand and give meaning to other life forms. Yet, is it possible that a human-centric viewpoint is setting the stage for an impoverished environment? And I think one of probably the single common thread through your works is this idea of looking at insects and others, but through a human lens. So humans' perceptions of these others, right? And when you say give meaning, I'm curious if you're thinking about functions, like ecosystem functions, pollination, that kind of thing, or are you thinking about very specifically and basically how they factor into our lives aesthetically and otherwise?
Well, I think that there's a couple issues with how we live now as opposed to when we were, let's say, hunter-gatherers. So if you think of some of the first art that humans did, humans of any sort, let's say cave paintings. And so you have a mixture of the human and the environment, the mixture of plant and animal and human. And so the richness really comes from how they did it, but also what they did. And what they did is showed that, in a sense, interaction between the human world and the non-human world. Mm-hmm. And so there's a cultural aspect to the divide that we are experiencing today between the walls that we have built, that, nature is out there and human worlds are in here. And when you think of, like the insect crisis, we don't consider insects because we have tried, and this is where the cockroach comes in, to eliminate them from our inside. And so the cockroach, the offense is that it can trespass at will, and that bothers us. And they're bigger. So it's, a fly we admire at least a little because it can fly. Let's say a mouse is a mammal, so we like it better. And I think when you think about this separation that we have had from the non-human world, that humans are, special and exempted from nature, and the mythologies over millennia that has fed into that. If we still had, I think, the attitudes that we had, we will never know, of hunter-gatherers, there's more of an interrelationship between the non-human world and human world. I mean, the idea of nature as a term never happened until way later. Mm-hmm. So, but I'm sort of interested in bringing something as critically essential to the ecosystem, insects in general, that whole area, arthropods, and bringing something that is critical to our survival into the cultural arena. In a sense, how they did in the cave paintings, these things that mattered to them, they ended up painting on the walls. And I feel that these are things that should matter to us. They're really incredibly funny and interesting and weird, and also as a way to get out of our myopic way of looking at this planet that we live on in this human dominated centric view. One could say, well, in a agricultural or scientific sense, we really need to have a better relationship with these systems on Earth that are supporting us. But also, I think in a cultural sense, we really need to kind of bring them in and say, hey, this is what we live with. And isn't it possible that there is a richness of life that we're sort of not looking at, because so much of art just looks at us and our needs and thoughts and desires and concepts and things like that, independent of the planet we live on, in a way. As if you took humans and you put them on another planet, some art doesn't even reflect that we're even living on Earth.
I'm going to turn this to specifically look at one of your series of artworks called Imposters. I'm going to pose a question to you. How would the world change if cockroaches were glistening, shimmering, iridescent, brilliantly colored, feathery, what we might say conventionally beautiful to the human eye?
I'm sure we would think about them differently. I mean, if a cockroach was, we're in our homes and they look like a ladybug with red and black spots, or they were, like some of the imposters, if they actually had really sort of like beautiful iridescent, like some beetles are really beautiful and iridescent, I think we would probably think differently about them. I think we would, because I don't know. I mean, we like insects that sort of pollinate flowers and blend in with good nature, and something about how the cockroach moves, and really this trespass is the biggest part of it. But, like the fly is much more dangerous to us in terms of the pathogens that it can carry, and also mice, but we seem to hate the cockroach the most.
And for you, you've talked about how you needed an introduction. You needed a little bit of time with Periplaneta americana, the American cockroach, right? Which is cosmopolitan originally from
I'd say I
Africa.
need more time.
And 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 what you saw was an elegance, a subtlety, and a beauty. You even referred to the antennae like almost making ballerina type movements, right?
It's intended where it's how I could read the mind of a roach, because if you look at humans, you look at the face and you kind of read the face. What's this face going to do? Is it really angry or is it really smiling? And so you can tell the state of a human, by the expression of the face. You can't with an insect because it doesn't express. A praying mantis can look at you and that's kind of, wow, very expressive. But the cockroach's antennae are so long, and this is what they're interested in. And so, and if they're doing it in a calm manner, then they're calm. When they get agitated, then you see it in their antenna and how they move. And I think because I was working on open sets, I had to know if they were agitated. I had to know what they were going to do. And one time I had a set that it was when I was filming the sex scene. And I have my set inside like a bathtub thing that I built with Vaseline walls. And I have glass on the front and on the top, and then I light it, and then whatever's supposed to be happening, whether it was being birth, because that was the life cycle. It was birth and sex and so and molting. And so I built the set, the sex set, bigger than I could put it in my refrigerator. It was a miscalculation. And the problem is I can only handle them when they're chilled enough that they can't move. Cold-blooded animals, like if you see nature programs and you see a rattlesnake, that snake is chilled. It's not moving. It can't really move very much. Right. And you can do that with a cold-blooded animal. And that's how you move cockroaches around. You put it in for 10 minutes. They're too sluggish. You put them on the set and then you're on your way. They wake up in a minute. And that's how you can tell how they wake up. So I had the top off and I was trying to figure out how to get them out of the set back in their home. Yeah. And this one cockroach was on top of the set, and it's he. They're all he. I got, he's looking at me and I'm looking at it and it's looking at me and it's kind of waving its antenna and then it's looking over there and then it's here. And I'm like, what are you going to do? And then to my horror, it flew into the bathroom, which was dark. And I'm thinking, you can't do that.
My scene.
Then I have to go, capture it in the bathroom because I don't want to live with these things.
Well, you were living with us.
Well, no, they were all in terrariums and I had to get them back in their terrarium. So eventually what I did is, it was winter. I took the entire thing, I put it out in the fire escape, chilled, and then got them out. So because I realized that there was no way for me to get them out when they were fully able to run and do their thing. And
I have to ask, side question, building owner, manager, neighbors, gallery, were you living above the gallery?
I fortunately own here, so nobody could, there was no landlord, but I did get a cease and desist letter to stop importing wildlife.
Oh, really?
The project was over at that point.
Wow. And so obviously this is in stark contrast to the Osa Peninsula and island activities with the ants. You've talked about some of the challenges where, while you're working with, you're not in control of the behavior of organisms that are being filmed or photographed. I'm always intrigued with human, non-human collaborations, and take artists like Kazuo Katanaga or Zhu Bing or Inumata and others who've worked with silkworm moths, bagworm moths, or Hubert Duprat with his caddisfly larvae, and others, they always have to cede control to some extent. And do you find that frustrating, exhilarating, a learning process, or?
It's kind of why I do it. Because as a painter, nothing happened unless you did it.
Huh.
And I thought, how do I get out of myself? I mean, how do I extend beyond just this package? And I mean, I know that painters, you know, conceptually, I mean, I'm a big fan of painting and never didn't want to be a painter. But it was for me, it wasn't a medium that I could use to explore.
Uh-huh.
I found I was too able to control it. And I think that my background as an engineer already was front loaded in the control category.
Yeah.
The math and science, the preciseness of it.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at the drawings that I do, they're very like scientific drawings. Everything is very kind of detailed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that, I mean, one, conceptually, painting wasn't a way for me to explore the things I was interested in exploring.
Mm-hmm.
But also it was a medium I could manipulate too easily. Not too easily, but I could manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to do is have a dialogue with something outside of me. And so being long time interested in the animal world,
yeah,
painting then became a medium between me and the subjects. And that's when I switched to photography, because photography was more a direct look into their world. And so I never aimed to be a photographer, but working with live things is where the jump happened. So when I started raising houseflies, painting doesn't interact with them in the same way that looking through a macro lens on a camera, that you see these tiny, tiny little flat houseflies. And then this world opens up, almost like looking through a microscope for the first time. And you see life on their scale as opposed to my scale. So the camera allowed me to investigate something that wasn't me. It was a good tool to do that. And then video, of course, then opened it up even further, because then you have sound and you have motion. And so each of these has been a way to interact with something that wasn't me.
You recently created works based on skeleted bark beetles. Were you drawn to them for their engravings?
Yes.
Their messages? And do you plan to go further in that direction? And do you plan to, I mean, you have such an array of media that you work with. Do you plan to stick with video and still photography and complement that with media you've worked with? Or do you plan, can you reveal whether or not you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the bark beetles is that the project is personal, because I am from the West and I've been going to the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho since I was a kid. And I've seen the massive die-offs because of the bark beetles. And then I've experienced being evacuated because of a very intense mega fire that took over. So, you know, and I've seen the changes over the course of my life, where the forest now is a completely different composition and things aren't growing back, and the massive die-off of, I mean, really the first one I noticed was a lodgepole pine, and now they're after the Doug fir. And then this summer, I was in Idaho for 3 months. You know, I mean, the stands of dead white bark pines above 9,000 feet are just sort of mind-boggling. So it's that I have experienced the issue, the problem myself, but also the beetle leave these really beautiful designs, and each species has its own design and its own drawing under there. And it's too good. You're kidding. You're doing these drawings. You know? So those are the two things that led me in it. But then what do you do with it?
Yeah. I
mean, I knew with the leafcutter ant project that video was the way in, because they're miraculous in their movement. And the cockroach project really started as a photographic project and then expanded from there into video. There's 5 videos of the cockroach project and 3 large sculptures. And so it's, and then a bunch of drawings, and it expanded from there. But the bark beetle project had no medium.
Mhm.
I had a concept. I had a thing I was wildly intrigued with, but I didn't have any medium. And I never really have a medium, but I didn't have a medium at all because I'm not working with the beetle itself. I'm working with the aftermath.
Yeah.
So then what do you do? And it's taken me a lot of experimentation over, I mean, last year, because of the show at the Drawing Center, I didn't work on it at all, but I've been, working on, I worked all summer. I mean, I've basically been working on this for 4 years and making experiments and then thinking, oh, this is really great. I really, really like this. And then, 3 weeks later, looking at it and think, oh, it sucks. It's just not there. So I've been doing that for 2.5 years. And only now do I have my bearings on it. And I've even committed to a show at University of Michigan.
Really?
Yes.
When?
So, yeah, November next year.
Really? I'll be there.
Yeah, good. And I had to be confident enough that, 1 month later, I wasn't going to go, no, I have to go back to the drawing board on all of it. But one of the things that I've been doing, there's 3 parts. There's the bark beetle part, there's the fire part, and then there's the fact that there are no beetles in the project. And I thought, beetle needs to have a face in the project. I mean, there has to be, the beetle needs to be there.
Yeah.
But how? I'm not going to take a picture of it. I mean, they're tiny and they're uncharismatic and they're ugly and they're
actually, you've looked at them under the scope, I hope, because they
not under the microscope. Well, yes, I've seen some of the electron microscope.
Sculptured and beautiful with strange pointy extensions out the back, and they're actually really gorgeous.
But not on a human eye scale. I mean, not that matters. I can't.
Yeah, they're teeny.
After leaf cutter ants, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to argue with you. They are not as elegant as a leaf cutter ant. Even the American cockroach with its spiny legs and its, I mean, frankly, that had more appeal. And so I thought, well, how am I going to bring the beetle into the project? And the other thing that's really intrigued me is that, the trees pump out sap or really, resin to try to get rid of the beetles. And you see these pitch pockets and, some of them droop down and some of them are just more like popcorn there, but they're really kind of beautiful. And then the whole resin sap thing anyways is sort of lifeblood of the tree. And it's what climate change acts on. So if it's dry and it's hot and the tree is under stress, it can't produce the sap or the resin to keep the tree healthy and expel an infestation. So it's the medium between the life and death of a tree under beetle attack. And it's that thing that stands between the beetle and the tree is sap or resin, whatever you want to call it. The sap is really kind of the nutrients, but some of it when it's weeping out is just clear. So you get both of it.
And so you've got the sap, like the phloem with all the sugars, and then the resin from the resin ducts as defense. And you could even bring in the beauty of amber, the ancient resins that have entrapped bark beetles and others.
Yeah. So, so then I was really intrigued by that. So there's the beetle patterns, there's the fire, and then this whole intrigue with the sap and the resin. And I thought, I'm going to try to make the sap resin into a medium I can paint with, and then paint the bark beetle life cycle in it.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So I tried a whole series this winter.
Yeah.
Because the sap is obviously in Idaho. And loved it. Was really, really happy with it. And I was controlling the viscosity of it with rubbing alcohol. So I'd put the chunks in. I'd go out into the forest, collect the chunks, put them in the rubbing alcohol, and then, depending upon the percentage of the mixture, it could be more watery or thicker, but and then if it was too watery, I'd open it up and let it all evaporate until it got to the right kind of honeyish consistency. I would do like a colored pencil drawing, and then do layers over the top of that to build up the lights and the dark with the material itself. So then when I went back to Idaho this summer, the surface, as opposed to looking, just shiny and beautiful and really amazing, I mean, the color is just wonderful.
Yeah.
Was all bubbly. So, that wasn't the case in my closed containers, airtight containers. So the rubbing alcohol was separating from the material and bubbling out, and then leaving the whole top to be kind of cratered.
Oh.
So then I have to do a bunch of research. Okay, well, now my technique doesn't work. I tried heat. That wasn't working because I couldn't keep it hot enough to be able to paint with it. I needed some way to be able to take it out of the chunks. So then I decided, I had a conversation with ChatGPT.
Oh, there you go. Always stimulating.
Do you think this is a good idea? So I thought, maybe if I get turpentine, true turpentine, not mineral spirits, but turpentine, it is essentially the same thing, only it's a watery version, right? It's from pine. And so I took some of that and put my chunks of resin in there, and it took 4 times as long to break it down. But then the material is not separating. So it dries, but you're not getting any of that kind of bubbling action, because the bubbling action actually started really within a few weeks of it happening. But they were really beautiful. They're really small and they're really pretty. I thought this is great. 6 months later, they were not small and pretty. They were, looking like craters of the moon. So anyway, so now I painted one for a show in New York, and I'm hoping, by the end of the month, it's still looking good.
Wow, that's super exciting. And now these are experimental, novel techniques. I'm curious if you distance yourself from, or you seek out, either methodologies used by other artists that would be relevant, or themes by other artists that would be relevant. So for example, Suze Wolf in the Pacific Northwest produces these beautiful bark beetle books, a very different approach and concept and technique and medium than you're using, but she's using bark beetles. Tim Musso does these outsized wood block prints with bark beetles, in which he features the beetles. And for example, there's a France-based artist who uses propolis and bees and has to blow them, or as in glass working, or she uses a solvent with them. So how often do you find yourself gravitating toward or distancing yourself from artists and their techniques and their subject? Or do you just rely on ChatGPT?
Well, I was sort of really interested in, finding a medium that would actually go together better with the resin than I guess rubbing alcohol. I don't know. It's probably a petrochemical product. I don't know. But I mean, that's one of the nice things about spending a certain amount of time in New York, is that I'm out constantly going to galleries, going to museums. I'm here in the fall and the spring. I basically see everything I can possibly see. So the input goes in. It's not necessarily, it's never really directed. I see as much as I can possibly see. And really not that many days go by where I'm not at least, because I'm downtown, it's easy, popping into one place or another. And because I'm not here all the time, I make a real concerted effort to really look at art. So it's not like I'm seeking out other artists and looking what materials they're using.
Yeah.
Because these multimedia projects that I work on take a long period of time, they're long-term projects, I have to find the language of the project. And that language really is informed by my interests in it and what excites me in a sense. What's enough for me? I mean, one of the problems, early on, is I'd get excited by something and I think, oh, this is a really good, direction. And then I would sort of like, it's not enough. I kind of get bored. It's not there. It's not enough. It's not enough input, whatever. And I think that, being an artist over a long period of time, you need to satisfy a certain, I don't know, it's harder and harder to satisfy. I mean, you need to have something that really, because you've seen so much art, you've made art. And I think that's where the critic comes in and says, no, it's just, it's just not good enough.
Mm.
And you have to say, okay, well, now what? Then you're like on your, that, and particularly with the bark beetle part of it, because the bark beetle informs the fire, the bark beetle part informs the sap works. If the bark beetle part fell apart, which it has over and over and over again, how am I going to work with these tracks? What am I going to do with them? When that wasn't working, then I spent all this time in this project where the heart of it is just not, it's conceptually really interesting, but artistically, aesthetically, it was hard to get it to a place where I'm excited about it. And I finally got there this year. And yeah, now I'm super charged up again.
Congratulations. I'm really excited to see these works. I have I don't want to take your whole day. So I have one question that could go off in a lot of different directions, but we've kind of danced around reception of your work. So your audience has responded in a variety of ways, and not just because of the use of arthropods in your work, but how you're representing and what conditions they're facing, right? So Execution Series is a perfect example, but also the food chain, right? And you got very strong responses, at least from a subset of your audience. I wanted to know, and this is somewhat related to what you were talking about a moment ago, we can't live in a bubble. And as an artist, when you're conceiving a work, imagining it, designing it, and executing it, how much thought and concern do you place on reception of the work, the reaction by your audience?
Zero. Because how would you know? I mean, the reaction one day will be different than the reaction another day, or one era as opposed to another era. And it's sort of, I mean, I think of it like this a little bit way. I'm an ice skater, you can skate or you can be the judge. You can't be both. And it's hard enough to, let's say, get out there and perform. You can't also have this idea that you're going to be judging yourself. I mean, yes, you can do the hardest things you can do or try to do them well, or, I mean, you can only take care of your space. You can't take care of the space around it. I wouldn't do things like with the cockroach project. I never killed anything. I never executed anything. Yes, I fed them to the frog and the tarantula, and I may have fed my remaining cockroaches. I fed to all my predators, so it wasn't like they didn't die. I mean, like in Safari, the roach dies at the end. Well, I didn't. I mean, that was the frog's got to eat. It's going to eat something that's alive. Yeah. So,
right.
So I was very clear that I didn't want the discussion about that project to center around, is it okay for an artist to kill a cockroach for her work? New York City spends millions of dollars a year exterminating cockroaches. We all pay taxes in New York City, so we support that, they're not from here. So, I mean, it's not like there's an ecological benefit that for them. So I didn't want to get into that discussion. So I made sure very, very carefully that there was no roach that died for the making of that work. Even though many cockroaches died, it was never by me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be a consideration of an audience, that I wanted the discussion to be something other than this endless thing of, is it okay for an artist to kill a cockroach?
Right. That's a beautiful note to end on. I love it. And I really appreciate your taking the time. And I'm excited to share this with another audience.
No, thank you. Thank you for your continued interest. And it was a pleasure to meet you, last year. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was brilliant. I loved it. And